Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges, as he explores turning the page on his life and yours.
Welcome to the next chapter with Charlie. I'm so glad you're with us. Our guest today is Rich Lewis, an author, speaker, and personal coach who focuses on centering prayer as a means for inner transformation. Rich's newest book is titled Sitting with God, A Journey to Your True Self Through Centering Prayer. Now, in preparing for this show, it occurred to me that many of us know very little about centering prayer, although it is a widely used vehicle for fostering contemplative prayer and a contemplative life. So let's see what Rich has to teach us today regarding centering prayer and the contemplative life. Rich Lewis, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. I look forward to our next 30 minutes or so. So thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, 30 minutes or more. Don't be, I can get wordy. So I really am looking forward because I've heard so much about centering prayer. I'm familiar with people that practice it, but I don't know much about it. So I'm really looking to you for wisdom, advice, and ideas. So tell me, what makes, in these days of so many choices for entering to intimacy with the divine, what makes centering prayer so attractive with regard to that?
Sure. So, centering prayer is considered two things. It is considered meditation, but it's also considered deepening our relationship with God. And maybe I'll give a quick history of centering prayer. So obviously the idea of sitting in silence with God is a couple thousand years old at least. But centering prayer was created in the early 1970s, actually by three Trappist monks. So and specifically one of them, William Manager, Father William Manager, was reading a book. I think it's a 12th century classic book called The Cloud of Unknowing. And as he read this book, kind of a method of silent, wordless prayer seemed to pop off the pages as he read it. So he kind of shared his insights with Thomas Keating and Basil Pennington. And then they began creating this practice called centering prayer, and practicing amongst themselves, practicing it with other clergy, and then more importantly, kind of rolling it out to everybody. Anybody can practice centering prayer. So the practice is about 50 years old, and we'll talk about how you do it. So it was created by three Catholic priests that happened to be Trappist monks. And then
were they involved with Merton at all?
I think they were familiar with him. I'm not sure that they actually interacted with him. And I think they even got the name centering from him, to be honest with you. I think the name,
really?
The idea of calling it that, I think came from Thomas Merton. I don't recall, and I've read some of their books, I don't recall them talking about where they visited with him. And I guess, I guess he passed away. I think he died in
68 or 69.
Right. Or it might have even been 58. I'm not sure. I'd have to look it up.
I think it was 60s. It was Vietnam War
60.
time.
Oh, you're right. No, you are right. So he passed away. So they probably were familiar with him, but I guess they created centering prayer almost, 5 plus more years after he had passed away. But I'm sure they were familiar with who he was and what he did, but I don't recall them mentioning that they worked with him in any capacity.
So it began around 1975. Is that right? Was the introduction?
I think actually 74 was when
74
when William Manager kind of created the idea of centering prayer and began talking with the other two priests, and then they began doing it amongst themselves, other clergy, and then kind of rolling it out to everyday people. And then about 10 years later, Thomas Keating created what was called the Contemplative Outreach Organization. And that was in 1984. And so it's contemplativeoutreach.org. And it's still a live site. And it's really considered kind of the main centering prayer site and organization. Because if you go on that site, you'll see all kinds of information on different groups that are practicing centering prayer all throughout the U.S. or internationally. You'll see a lot of videos from people. You'll see a lot of resources on that site. So it's really the main hub, if you will, for centering prayer at this point. I mean, there's a lot of people practice centering prayer, but it's probably considered the main hub for centering prayer. So, and we'll get into how you do it. So that's really what it is. 50-year practice, 3 Trappist monks, and 10 years later, created the organization that's still going strong.
Yeah, a 50-year practice of centering prayer, but the practice of silence and contemplative prayer, and as you said, goes, the Cloud of Unknowing, it's 1,000 years ago it was written.
Right.
So this is sort of a modern day take on how we can apply this in our current lifetimes.
Yes, that's a perfect way of saying it. It's kind of making it a modern day take for practices that have been around for quite a while, and just making it accessible for ordinary everyday people.
Yeah, and it's practiced by so many people. Do you have any idea what the numbers of people that are practicing centering prayer are?
I don't. I'd like to think it's well into the millions. And some people,
really? Really?
I don't know the exact numbers, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
because my friends or family, nobody practices centering prayer, but some people, I'll share with them what it is, and they're doing a very similar practice. So it's not a whole lot different than perhaps some other meditative practices. So this really it's just a way of opening to the divine within, and there's many different ways to do it. So I think there's not just centering prayer, but just in general contemplative prayer. And you and I talked even before this about Lectio Divina and other practices. So I think lots of people are practicing contemplative prayer, centering prayer, Christian meditation, Lectio Divina, chanting, if you will. So millions and millions of people are doing probably some type of contemplative practice.
Yeah, it's reaching back. As I told you, I've done quite a deep dive into the early to late medieval Christian mystics, and the way you describe centering prayer is very similar to the way I pray, although I've never called it centering prayer.
Right.
But there's identities that are particular to centering prayer that are different than the contemplative practice. So tell me, what practices do adherents to centering prayer? What do they do on a regular or somewhat regular basis? What does a practice of contemplative prayer look like, or centering prayer? I'm sorry.
Sure. I'll describe how you do it. You sit comfortably with your eyes closed, and then interiorly, to begin your prayer, you introduce what we call a sacred word. It's usually 1 or 2 syllables. It could be God, Jesus, the beach. It could be a color, and that just signifies you're beginning your silent sit, and you're opening to the presence and actions of God within. And then as you're sitting there in silence, when you notice that you're engaging your thoughts, and what I mean by that is you begin thinking about what you're going to do after your sit. If you have some errands or responsibilities to do after your sit, you're beginning to think about that, or you're thinking about something that happened before your sit. Maybe you had an argument with someone that's bothering you. Then that's really you're engaging your thoughts. So that's when you interiorly reintroduce the sacred word, to let go of these engaged thoughts, come back to the present moment, come back to God in the present moment, and then let go of that word as well. So the sacred word is just used to bring you back to the present moment. It's not used as a mantra. So there are mantra practices where you're saying a mantra in your head over and over again, or even chanting. I guess you're chanting something over and over again. But in centering prayer, you just use it when needed to come back to the present moment, not as a mantra.
Yeah, it reminds me of sort of a practice that, I'm very into hemispheric brain thought, left and right brain, and the left brain being the verbal and logic and sequential, and the right brain being more of feelings, emotions, symbols, icons. And it sounds to me like you may start with vocabulary. You may start with a word, but it quickly transcends that word, does it not? And it goes into a whole different aspect of experience, if I may, of sitting there and experience with the divine. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, I think what we're trying to do with centering prayers is let go of us and all of our thoughts and just sort of remove. We think of these as barriers to God. So we're just trying to remove all the barriers to God while we're sitting there. So though it's very difficult, we're trying to be, in between our thoughts. And just when you are in between your thoughts, another thought comes. But there are, I think you can, like sometimes I know I didn't fall asleep, but I know I was in the spaces between my thoughts is the way I think of it
Yeah,
as.
yeah, the
So
liminal spaces.
we're just trying to open to God and eliminate barriers to God, and barriers to God are a lot of our thoughts and emotions as well when we're sitting in silence. So we're just trying to sit in pure awareness or pure God, if you will.
Yeah, how does it, apart from the direct interaction with God, how does this differ from what, I'm reluctant to use the word Buddhist, but how does it, how is it work? Is it similar to Buddhist meditation of sort of emptying the mind?
I guess it's the same in that it's meditation, but with centering prayer practitioners, we believe we're sitting with God and we're opening to the divine within. And I
Hmm.
think of it as a reverse prayer. I think of it, I'm sitting with God, letting go of me and all my thoughts, and then I'm letting God pray in me at a deeper level beyond all my thoughts and emotions. So that's how I think of centering prayer. As I'm sitting with God and I'm letting God pray in me whatever God knows I need, even just for that day, whether it's peace, wisdom, inner calmness. I'm just letting God act in me, and God knows what I need for that day.
What does that tell me? Tell me, Rich, what does that look like or feel like when you're in that state?
I guess you notice the fruits of the practice really outside of centering prayer. So during centering prayer, you're really just letting go of anything and all thoughts. So even if you feel terrific in centering prayer, and that's okay, you're even letting go of that because that's really a thought that you're engaging. So it's what I notice is outside of the practice. I notice the fruits of the practice, and it's really not fruits of the practice, it's fruits God has graced me with. So I've been practicing centering prayer for over 10 years now. And
Hmm.
if I reflect upon myself prior to centering prayer and after centering prayer, and now that I've been at it for 10 years, I think I'm a much more confident person in myself. I'm more willing to get out of my comfort zone and try and do new things. I'm better at listening to people and giving them the space they deserve and not instantly reacting. And not that I didn't enjoy life before centering prayer, but I think I'm more open to life and what's today going to bring, and what exciting things am I going to see and experience today. So all those are fruits kind of outside of centering prayer. So during centering prayer, we're just sitting with God and trusting, if you will, the process. Then
Yeah.
outside of centering prayer, and I think I know I mentioned with centering prayer, we use the sacred word to let go and open to God. You take that same let go gesture, if you will, outside of the practice with you. You learn to like if I work from home and I work remotely, and I learn to let go of all the tasks that don't have to happen today and not worry about them, and hone in and focus on the ones that do. So centering prayer, kind of, you take that let go gesture with you. I let go of the 20 things that don't need to happen today and open up to the 1, 2, 3, 4 things that have to happen today.
It sounds to me, as I'm interpreting what you're saying here, and I really love what you're saying, that in centering prayer, you have acquainted yourself with dedicated listening rather than speaking. So much of prayer we take as almost transactional. It's us speaking to God and telling our needs to God, our wants to God. This is, I'm not discounting that kind of prayer, because that kind of prayer is biblical, but it's very different than this centering prayer that you're talking about. It's very different in that you're listening what God might have to say to you.
Exactly, and by all means, and I do verbal prayer. I do it outside of centering prayer. So by all means, don't give up that type of prayer. Just complement your verbal prayer with some quiet prayer, silent prayer. Where verbal prayer, you're talking to God, and silent prayer, you're now the listener. And it's not it may not be audible, but it's really beyond words and thoughts. Kind of God tapping right into your soul.
Are they sort of interweaving at the same time, where you're audible and you're listening, and does that sort of work together, or are you more just strictly in the listening mode in centering prayer?
Centering prayer, you're really strictly in the listening mode. The idea is just to continuously let go of your engaged thoughts and come back to the present moment. So even if you have this wonderful idea in centering prayer, you let go of that as well, because if it's that important, it's God's going to bring it up to you outside of your centering prayer sit. So yeah, you're really just sitting with God and letting go of you and your thoughts and any engaged thoughts that come up.
Yeah. What's occurring to me as we're talking here? How do you view, after a decade of doing centering prayer, has your ontology of God, has your understanding of the nature of God changed significantly over the last 10 years than it was previous to that?
Great question. It definitely has. So prior to centering prayer, and even probably as I began, I thought of God as kind of above me, looking down at me,
Mm-hmm.
maybe disappointed with me. Maybe I was not doing a good job listening to God. Now that I've been practicing centering prayer for a while, I think of God is above me, looking at me, but not critically. God is within me, and as my true self, trying to be expressed as as actions God wants me to take. So God's kind of above me, but not critical. God's within me. So I wasn't thinking of God within me prior to centering prayer, and I even think of
Mm.
God as so God's a loving, kind, compassionate presence that's watching over me, within me, kind of walking with me in life. And I think of it as I sit with God during my centering prayer sits, and then I walk with God and partner with God in life. God is behind me, sort of pushing me, like, let's go, or God's in front of me, like with his hand out, reaching to me, saying, let's go, trust me, we can do this. Let's move out of this comfort zone.
Yeah, I love that. I read this morning in a inspirational reading that talked about Jesus, and it talked about the everydayness of Jesus. That there was a holiness to Jesus, to be sure, but he didn't. That was not his focus. His focus was walking, dining, and telling stories. And it just was on a very human level, on a very practical, intimate level. And we think of Jesus that way, but rarely do we think of the Godhead that way, the Trinity that way, the Father. We never think of the Father as that. We think of the Father as some rancorous old guy that's out to get us, And that is just wholly untrue.
Right. In fact, I don't know if you've read any Brian Zond. He's written a number of books. He pretty
I have
much
not.
kind of says, if Jesus is what God is like, if you want to see God, look at Jesus. And I may not be saying exactly the way he says it, but he's written a lot of books. I think he leads a fairly large church in St. Louis, Missouri, if I'm getting the name right. But
Okay.
if you look him up, Brian Brian Zond, Zahnd. He's written a lot of books, and I like to listen to him from time to time, and I've read most of his books. But he pretty much says, just, if you want to know what God is like, look at Jesus.
That's perfect. I love that. I'm writing right now. I've been, as listeners know, I've been threatening to write a book for a couple of years, and I'm actually almost 20 pages in, which is
Okay.
which is if I'm that deep in, then I'm going to do this book, and it's titled A History of Love. Before the beginning, there was love. And it all begins with the Father. The Father is love, goodness, humility, poverty, all these things we associate with Jesus. The Father exhibited in the process of forming the Trinity, in the process of forming this loving relationship, and said they breathe forth they breathe forth from the same breath. And so this idea, I love this, what Zond, is that his name?
Right, Brian Zond.
What Zond says, that if you want to know God, look at Jesus.
Right.
That's beautiful. That's really
simple and true, though.
Yeah, but how often do we do that? We view Jesus as a prophet, as a good guy, but not as the relatable human incarnation of deity.
Right.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. You know, you talk, and I think we've kind of alluded to it, but I still have a question just on centering prayer. And I think you write that it generates a spiritual awakening. Does it just happen? Is it a conscious effort? What kind of spiritual awakening, or what is the process of doing that?
And again, I guess if you if you do the practice, so if you have a daily, and then it's next weeks have passed, months have passed, and years have passed, the practice has a way of, I guess, doing you. And it's not the practice, it's really a tool that opens us up to God. So it's really, we notice what the practice does to us, really what God does to us outside of the practice. So I think you become more conscious of God, and more willing to understand more and more about God, and you learn better to follow God, and what is God calling me, that you to do as a practitioner of contemplative practice, so I'll call it. So I think it just has a way of awakening you to God, and then you're better able to listen to God, and you're better able to trust God, and then move forward and take action and do things that years ago you never thought you would be doing.
You talk about the really essential role of silence in centering prayer. Do you want to talk about silence? I was looking up there's a quote by Blaise Pascal, a philosopher from the 1600s. And, so 600 years ago, Blaise wrote, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. 600 years ago, Blaise wrote that, and that is what we're facing today, isn't it? It's our inability to sit in a room alone quietly, without watching TV, even without reading.
Right. No, I mean, I even think of it as, if more and more people took a silent pause, maybe we'd have less wars. We'd be nicer to each other. Because you can just think of it simply: someone says something to you, you immediately want to react. What if you took a silent pause and then didn't react? So silence. One, I think, that's one thing it can definitely help with, just pausing before we even take an action. And sometimes we don't have to take an action. There's no reason to take any type of action. But also, I think people don't want to sit with themselves because they don't want to know what they're thinking and how they feel about themselves. So maybe some people aren't happy with themselves, or they don't think they're good people. So stopping yourself from being silent, keep pushing these voices down within you, that we tell ourselves things that aren't true. I'm not a good person, or I'm too old to try this, or I'm too young to try this, or I'm the wrong person for this, or we tell ourselves all these things. So if we have to sit in silence, we hear all of this, but it can heal us. I mean, because what happens in centering prayer is, repressed thoughts we had come up and they leave. Thoughts we knew we have come up and can leave. And then what's left after you've been able to, it's really like a physical and emotional healing, because our bodies hold a ton of stress. So if you practice a contemplative practice for 10, 15, 20 years, your body is not as tense. It just isn't. And your emotions that you're holding in, you're not holding them in anymore. And repressed thoughts are being released. So you're like a freer person. So what you took as normal 10 years ago isn't what your normal is 10 years later. So I think of it as freedom, pure freedom. God doesn't want us to carry around all of this emotional and physical baggage that we probably don't realize we carry.
Yeah, Jesus talks about our burden is light,
Right.
and that is not the burden we have in a spiritual life. I so concur with what you have to say. Silence. So I've participated in silence. I have no trouble with silence. I'm an introvert. My wife and I both work out of the home, but we can, her office is in downstairs in the front of the house, and my office is upstairs in the rear of the house. And so we can go all day and see each other 2 or 3 times. How you doing? And I'm in my office writing or working or praying or pondering. I love the word, instead of contemplating, I love the word pondering. And that I'm pondering the depths of God. Let's what it's going to sound like an awkward question, but what occurs in silence? How do I remain silent? Because I am faced with what the Buddhists call the monkey mind, jumping from tree to tree. I am haunted by that monkey mind that's going on. I want to silence that as well, don't I?
So, centering prayer is one practice to help silence the monkey mind. And as I mentioned, we use a sacred word. So whenever we engage our thoughts, we then reintroduce interiorly the sacred word to let go of the engaged thoughts. But like Christian meditation, and I don't practice it, they use a mantra. So I think they're constantly saying a mantra in their mind. So that's obviously
Oh yeah,
pushing
yeah.
away any of the engaged thoughts, because you're repetitively saying. So I think I think you have to find the practice that works for you and helps you eliminate the monkey mind, so to speak. So for me, centering prayer just seemed to work well. I used to just sit, and so prior to centering prayer, I discovered it in 2013 when I was cruising Amazon looking for a book to read. I discovered centering prayer in a book called Healing the Divide: Recovering Christianity's Mystic Roots by Amos Smith. I had been sitting in silence for 6 months or so, didn't know what I was doing, and it was hard. But when I read his book and listened to him talk about a practice he had been doing called centering prayer, I began to try it for myself and realized, there's my practice, and here's how I can do it successfully. So I think each person has to find a practice that works for them, that helps them kind of move. You can't get rid of it, but helps kind of let go of the monkey mind, or realize there it goes again. Now I'm going to sort of try to gently let it go and come back to the present moment.
You know what I want to do right now, Rich, is I want to take a brief break, and then we will come back and wrap the show up. But I'm really looking forward to the questions that I have for you coming. So let's take a quick break. Welcome back. This is Charlie Hedges, and you're listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie and my very special guest, Rich Lewis, who is author of the book titled Sitting with God, A Journey to Your True Self Through Centering Prayer. Let's take the subtitle of that book and let's talk about what is a journey to your true self.
Sure. So I believe that's what happens during centering prayer. We're letting go of who we are not. So letting go of all the thoughts we might tell ourselves that really aren't true. They're fear, worry, anxiety, I'm too old to do this. I'm too young to do this. We're letting go of all these thoughts and opening up to who we are. And I think of who we are as our true self, the person God wants us to be, the actions God wants us to take. So I think of it as I sit with God, and then I get up and I try to take my true self actions on a daily basis. What does my true self need to be doing today?
Ooh, give me ideas. What kinds of actions does a true self need to do?
Sure. Well, and as I think of my own practice, like prior to centering prayer, my website Silence Teaches didn't exist, and it was not even on the radar screen. And so that was my true self, was a website called Silence Teaches to share centering prayer with people and how it's healed and transformed me. And then my true self became, and I'll blame Amos, and I'm being funny when I say that, he and I became friends because I talked about the book I read. I reached out to him on his website. We began a back and forth email dialogue, and we actually became friends. And he said, "You need to write a book." And he nudged me, and he served as a really great mentor for the book writing process. So my true self was to write a book, which was published in August of 2020. And then my true self was let my website continue to evolve. So I added a coaching tab to help people that might want help starting a practice or going deeper in their practice. So coaching and speak, and then I added a speaking tab, and I got asked to speak in front of small and large groups. Most of it is via Zoom, but speaking, podcasts, that kind of stuff. So I just kind of let it evolve. And then even in my family life, we lived in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but when my job went remote, it gave us the ability to move. So we moved about 600 miles south to North Carolina. So my true self was supposed to relocate to warmer weather. So that kind of stuff where I'm just listening to the inner nudges of God and taking them where I should go. So 10 years ago, no website, no book, scared to death to speak in front of people. Never would have thought of myself as a coach that could help people, but that was my true self waiting to come out.
So those are I love that. Those are external actions. Those are ways that you exhibited your true self.
Right.
There's another side of true self that I know that you deal with, and you call them limiting beliefs. And that is the false self is the anger, the fearful, the less than confident,
right.
All the childhood things that happen to us. How do you in your centering prayer practice, how do you manage these limiting beliefs?
You really just have to let them go, and just when they come up, let go of them and come back to your sacred word. And then even outside of centering prayer, I do journaling. So I might journal one of the limiting beliefs and just type that I don't think I'm the right person for this task, or I don't think I have the right skill set. But then I can turn the journaling around as to start typing, actually, that's wrong. God planted this within me. God wants me to take action. I just need to take the next step. The path will be revealed. So you can kind of motivate yourself through journaling. You can create more self-awareness through journaling because you're just jotting down how you feel, and then you can turn it around to self-motivate yourself and realize that God doesn't want me to feel this way. God implanted this within me, and God wants me to take action and just take the next step, and then the path will kind of reveal itself. So journaling, I do a lot of journaling. I try to journal almost every day. And I also I like to do affirmations. I'll write down single sentence statements that are kind of affirmations of things that I think God wants me to do, whether it's related to work or my family or my physical health.
So personal affirmations of yourself. So you you're giving yourself permission to be
Right.
this better self.
Right. I'll jot them down, and I like to read them to God before my centering prayer sit, and then just say, I'm going to give them to you, God, and now I'm going to go into my centering prayer sit, and then I review my affirmations frequently. So as long as they feel I'm excited about them, I have an inner peace and calm about them, they don't harm me or harm others, they stay. But if any one of those happens, then I either tweak it so that it's no longer out of sync with. I guess I want to partner with God on my affirmations. I want them to be God and I working on them. And does God want me to do these in the first place? So that's kind of my true self barometer, is the inner peace and calm, the excitement about them. Even if they're outside of my comfort zone, that's okay. God wants me to move out of my comfort zone. And as long as they don't harm me or harm others, then I'll continue to move forward on them.
Do you do in your journaling, or maybe in addition to your journaling, do you do any work in writing about, this is who I am and this is what I am called to do? Do you write about
I probably in a way do, because I'll write sometimes my dreams in a journal. This is what I want to do. These are things I think I want to accomplish. So I probably do indirectly. And each journaling session is different. So sometimes I don't even know what I'm going to do, and I'll just start typing. I have no idea what I'm supposed to
Yep.
journal today. I'll just type that, and all of a sudden I start, and off I go, and something happens. Sometimes I'll read a book, and it'll spawn an idea, and I'll jot it down and journal on that the next time I have my journaling session. So I just try to let the journaling process be spontaneous and kind of free flowing.
How do you help people that, because, as you're coaching people in this process, we've talked about two disciplines that are very difficult for some people, not for everyone, but for some people, and that is silence and journaling. There's, people will talk about, when they talk about silence, they'll talk to me about meditation. I can't meditate because of my brain's always thinking, I can't get out of this, I can't do that. And then also with journaling, they just say, I just don't have time. I just can't get into it. And it is such an essential part of the prayerful life, is it not? I mean, how do you help people with that?
You really have to, you kind of have to make yourself do it. So like people really want to start some type of contemplative practice, and they want to know how to start. I encourage them, first commit to trying it for 30 days. Make it the first thing you do in the morning before you do anything. And you don't have to jump right into 20 minutes of sitting in silence. So perhaps 1 to 5 minutes. So just try the idea of sitting with God for 1 to 5 minutes each morning before you do anything for 30 days. And then after the 30-day period, just reevaluate. What you think? Did I like this? And then hopefully they did, and then you start lengthening it. Then you start increasing the time that you're sitting with God to 10 minutes and 15 minutes and 20 minutes. And then at that point, if you have a regular practice going, I encourage them to sit twice, because
Yeah.
the morning sit, is like a reset button and a start your day and get you moving for the day. And then now I recognize some people, I have the luxury of working from home, so I can stop in early
Right.
afternoon and I can do another centering prayer session so that I can finish the day as strongly as I started the day. So I encourage people, if they can, practice twice a day, because
Mm-hmm.
the second sit is like a reset. It's like a reset, a recharge of
Mm-hmm.
yourself, where you're continuously connecting to God. And some people will say, I don't have the time to do it. I would say I've noticed, and you have to practice it for yourself. It has a way of giving you back time. So when I took that second sit, even though I was super busy, it made me more productive the second half of the day, because I took that time to sit with God. Because after my sit, when I went back to work, I was more productive because I was more calm, more at peace with myself, more connected with God, and I could hone in on what I needed to do, and I was in a better state. So it has a way, it gives you back time, but you won't know that till you try it.
Yeah, it's removing the clutter or somewhat decluttering the clutter.
So you have to discipline yourself. It is a discipline. You have to just be willing to do it, and don't judge your sit. So don't just because you had tons of thoughts doesn't mean it was a bad sit. So just do the practice of silence and don't judge it. God doesn't need a whole lot of time to pray in you. He can pray in you, and she spirit can pray in you within milliseconds.
Yeah, it's very common in the mystics to write, praying badly is better than not praying at all.
Right. There is no such thing as a bad sit. And
No, there isn't.
if you didn't show up, and it doesn't mean you're a bad person, just forgive yourself and show up the next time. So if you completely forgot to do it, don't beat yourself up. Just show up the next day.
I'm curious. Is there really an impact from 1 to 5 minutes of silence?
I would say there has to be. I mean, there just has to be. Even the earlier example I gave, where we just take a silent pause instead of reacting, there's definitely an impact. You didn't say that mean thing to someone that you shouldn't have said, or you didn't take that action that you shouldn't have taken in the first place. So I would say yes. Even 1 minute of silence can follow you into your everyday life.
Yeah, like breathing.
Right.
Like breathing,
just a pause,
deep breathing.
just taking a pause before we react. So we should, I try to, even if someone makes me angry, I try to take that pause and not react, so that I don't do and say something I shouldn't. But no, I think, and silence is just healing. It calms us down. It resets us. It releases tension in our body. It releases emotions and repressed thoughts. So it's just a very healing and transforming process, even as short as 1 minute.
Yeah.
Because it compounds over time. 1 minute, 7 days a week, times 1 year, times multiple years is lots of time in silence.
The more you do it, the more you have.
Right.
It's like love, is it not? The more you love, you don't run out of love.
Right.
It's impossible to empty yourself of love, although the mystics will write about emptying yourself, and then it's immediately refilled through the fountain fullness of God the Father is filling us back with love.
Right.
And that it's like redeeming time. The more you do it, the more you find that the time is not an impact.
And that makes me think, when you say, I used to think of my centering prayer sits were God filling me with God's self and God's love, and now it's like, well, God's always been there, it's me really realizing that this love, I'm already filled with the love. So I when I first started practicing, I used to think I came to have God fill me, until I realized I already am filled. I just didn't realize it.
Oh, that's such a beautiful way to look at it. I like that. I've got a final question that I think is very important for our audience. And, we've mentioned God and Jesus. Are we talking about, is centering prayer, is this a Christian, and the monks and the priests, is this a Christian practice?
I would say anybody can practice it. So it was created by 3 Trappist monks, and I know they were reacting to other secular practices that were going on at the time, and wanted something for the Christian community. So it's different from those types of practices, in that it is meditation, but we think of it as we're opening to God within us, and getting out of the way and deepening our relationship with God. So what I like to tell people is anybody can practice centering prayer. Anybody can try this practice and see what happens, despite what they think, like what maybe they don't know if they believe in God, or maybe they don't, or they're fearful of God, or they're not sure if they believe in God, or how God thinks of them. You come as you are to this practice and just see what happens. And even the contemplative outreach and the founders of centering prayer believed in a lot of trying to get the right word of talking with other groups, and they would often pull together different religions because they all have some type of
Right.
contemplative practices, and they wanted to have dialogue with these different groups. So,
Yeah.
so I would say no, it's not. It's not a Christian practice, and if you're not Christian, you can't practice it. I encourage anybody to try it and see what happens, and come as you are with wherever you are on your faith journey.
And maybe it's just a matter of being open to the possibility that there is something else in the cosmos that is orchestrating what's going on. And maybe
Right.
not orchestrating every action, but orchestrating the general purpose and the general activity. And then if we can wrap our arms, how do you wrap your arms around that? That's a huge question. But if we can wrap our arms around the fact that there is what Thomas Aquinas called the prime mover, something that started this all in action. And if we can focus on that, then that really makes the practice very, very meaningful.
Very, very well put. Very well put.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, Rich, this has been a blast. Thank you so much for spending time with me today.
No, I appreciate it. I think we covered a lot of ground, but I think it'll be very helpful for your listeners. So, no, great discussion.
We did cover a lot of ground. And I want you to know that on my show notes, I have your website, and I also have an Amazon link to your book, Sitting with God. And I'm encouraging our listeners to check that out. I think they'll really like it.
Sure, and I have a free ebook, Centering Prayer ebook, on my site. So if they come to my site and subscribe, they'll get. It's a very short, easy to read book, and they can get a simple, basic understanding of centering prayer. If it's something they want to check out for themselves.
Perfect. Thank you, man. And I also want to thank all our listeners for tuning in to the next chapter with Charlie. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.